everyone. My name is Tom Van Norman, co-founder with the ICS Village. Bryson Bort's our other co-founder. Here today for people to talk about IT versus OT. What works for one may not work for the other. Aaron Crow from Industrial Defender, introduce yourself. And
Aaron Crow, CTO of Industrial Defender.
Hi, I'm Jeff Jones. I'm the director of the Sci-Fi ICS team at GRIMM.
Chris Bihary from Garland Technology. I'm the CEO, co-founder.
Patrick Miller, CEO of Ampere Industrial Security.
Thank you, guys. So started off today, let's start over with Aaron. Aaron, what is the difference between IT and OT?
Well, obvious is the letter, obviously, but operational technology is technology that's really controlling physical processes, whether it be in a manufacturing facility, in a power generation facility. It's the same process around automation, around turning lights on. So technology that's controlling physical processes.
Jeff, you got anything to add to that?
It's just a completely different environment with different safety considerations. In an IT environment, there's considerations around data and temperature in the data center, keeping those systems safe. And in an industrial environment, it's a completely different culture. Safety is a way of life. Those pieces of equipment out in those environments can injure or kill people or have kinetic effects on critical infrastructures in the country that we depend on. So it's a completely different environment, a completely different set of considerations for risk.
One of the things that we always say is the CIA triad. Confidentiality is important in the IT side. Not that it's not important in OT, but availability and safety is really the focus around in OT.
Yeah. Chris, Patrick, anything to add?
Yeah, and you also see in the OT space that, especially manufacturing environments like that, right? Just very focused about uptime.
Right.
You see that, there's, in IT, you got the data center, it's very clean. Right, you got the racks, everything's very documented, and in the OT environments, it can be really difficult to look at securing it, getting access to the data, and we'll definitely be talking about that more today.
Yeah, IT people wear like tennis shoes and things. OT people wear steel-toed boots, so there's a big difference. And the challenge with this is, IT and OT, there's a lot of it that's just T.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing. It's just used for operational purposes or IT purposes. But yeah, it was well said. I mean, when IT goes down, people get frustrated. They might lose some money. When OT goes down, people can die. So there's a significant difference.
Probably the other piece, and you hit on it right there, was the people part, right? It's not all about the technology, but that technology brings the people. The skill sets that they have, the people that are wearing the steel-toe boots, they're focused on making sure the plant runs. When I turn the light switch on, the power comes on. They're not necessarily cyber people, not necessarily technology people, but they're the ones that are running the site, and they have to do some of these technology things. They don't have a team of technologists that are focused on all the different aspects around the cyber in OT.
And the job roles couldn't be more different. Like, in traditional IT, some of my early titles as an IT engineer or data center engineer, network engineer. Engineer means something completely different in the operational world. It's an electrical engineer, right. A chemical engineer. That's a completely different trade than the traditional, term for an engineer in IT.
Sure.
Definitely a lot of differences. So Patrick, with such a large difference, how can an asset owner go about securing their network?
Which one?
Great question.
Yeah.
They are all different.
Well, we hope they're different. We hope they're different, because in some cases, IT and OT are mixed into one environment, and that's a really bad idea.
Yeah.
And God forbid you connect that to the internet, even worse idea. But yeah, in theory, if you've done things starting down the right path, you've got your OT in one network and your IT in another network. That's like step one to the path of better security in OT. The securing the network, you're typically going to isolate the OT as much as you can because it doesn't behave the same. You can't update it as frequently, and sometimes if you update it, your vendor will void your warranty and all kinds of other problems around just managing the OT pieces. IT, you get a lot more availability in what you can do to manage it. So securing the network itself, standard network hardening stuff on the IT side. On the OT side, it's usually a firewall and a bunch of soft, chewy middle on the inside that you got to protect in other ways. Typical goal, if you can get to a stage, most companies aren't there yet, but your goal should be, you can take the IT and the OT and completely separate them, and you can put OT in like turtle mode. You can lock down the shell and wait till the danger passes, open back up, and you got no dependencies. That's your ultimate goal. Like, that's the really good mature state.
Yeah, and part of the thing that just start differently in OT, a lot of times to start out, what am I going to do? I don't know what I have. A lot of these places don't even know the technologies they have. They don't know where their OT systems are. A lot of times they don't know where their IT environments stop and where their OT environments start. So where do I put that firewall? Where do I start? Who owns all the OT equipment? Who's responsible when it goes down? They're really good on the technology side, making sure that the plant's running from a operational perspective, but the technology side, sometimes it's a gray area of who owns it, who's going to respond.
Yeah, the owning piece is always interesting, right? Because you can find, you got the Honeywells or the ABBs, and you're going in there and they want to secure some assets, but then they're like, well, I don't own that.
Right.
I can't touch it. Yeah. It's not mine. You mentioned the warranty side of it. So there's a lot of challenges in these environments where generally in IT, right, the only thing that's maybe not owned is, well, the router's owned by AT&T or Verizon.
Sure.
That's about it.
Yeah.
And, but in the OT space, it is interesting that the challenges of working with all these different vendors who are running some of the machinery for them and some of the outsourcing and the control, yet you're still responsible, right, as the security person to make sure that, there's not going to be a breach in that location, but they're like, well, don't touch it. So
yeah.
And where do Aaron mentioned, where do you start? You need to know what you have. A good starting point is to identify, to think about, whatever your company does, whether you make a widget or you keep power on or you keep gas flowing or treating water or chemicals, you start with an assessment of your crown jewels. Without this thing, without this box, without this technology, without this system, without this router, I can't do what I do, whatever it is. And then you walk it back from there. What is connected to that? Identify that critical process or critical processes. It ends up kind of being a systems of systems type of assessment, identifying your critical processes, looking at the dependencies and the things that support those processes, and walking it back from there.
So adding into that, it's not always a technology response, right? It's people, process, and technology. So it's training, it's processes, and how do I respond to things, and really understanding the OT and the business risk, not just the technology stuff. It's easy to go buy a product and throw it in, but unless you have people trained on how to use it, what are they going to do with it, and the scenarios, you've got to have all that to have a complete program.
Yeah, and you did touch on a little bit of the external component of who owns it. There's co-owned, co-managed, co-maintained, co-everything in these environments.
Yep.
Divestment, all kinds of things happen, merger, acquisition. Internally within the organization, sometimes you don't know who owns it.
Right.
So it could be networking, or it could be like the 3 engineers in a basement who wrote the app, and then Dave died, and it was under his desk, and I don't know who's managing it now. So that happens too.
Yeah.
So we have some pretty big differences on how we can secure our network. Let's talk about threats. Jeff, what are some threats? Are the threats the same between IT and OT, or what are the threats?
They can be, but there's a completely different consideration of risk for those threats. Threats, like I think Patrick touched on earlier, threats to an IT environment, talking about the CIA triangle, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Typically with IT systems, you are worried about the confidentiality first of your data, the integrity of that data and that information, and then the availability of it. With an OT system, the systems must be up and running and available first and foremost. So the risk considerations around something like that is different. And then also, like we said earlier, the life safety issue. A bad day in an IT data center might be, it gets too hot, systems shut down, you can't do your business, your website isn't running, your data isn't available, things like that.
Ransomware.
Ransomware shutting down your system. But a bad day in an OT environment could be that somebody is significantly injured, somebody is, heaven forbid, killed by an unsafe environment, or you can't have clean water that day, the lights go out in a large area. So those considerations are significantly different as a start.
I always like to sometimes just break it down to the really simple. And you think about when you get up, right? You get up and you turn a light on. Maybe I was out late last night and I go get my aspirin, and you look at turn the lights on, the manufacturing of your aspirin or your medicine and pharmaceuticals, and you just start walking through your day and you start realizing all this critical infrastructure that everyday person is affected. Yeah. And you don't think about it, right? I have to pour the water, to have my Advil, and then you're moving out through the day, and you don't think it's a really hot day in New York City, and if the electricity goes down, AC units are out. It's not just at the plant, at the facility, we're affecting populations here, and it's a big consideration that we all got to think about, and it's a big burden. To your point,
Right.
IT, maybe someone can't put their orders in today, which is hurts the stock price and the profitability. So it's important that you think about sometimes just the real basic.
Yeah, an operation. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just the difference in the threat actor is very significant. The people that want to harm an IT system, there's a bunch of them, and they typically do it for financial motives. Sometimes it's corporate espionage and all kinds of other really interesting things. But the people that are going to attack an OT system, that's typically a nation state or somebody who wants to make the machine go boom and cause big problems. Yeah. So those motivations, the motive behind why they do what they do, it feeds into the capabilities and the resources they have and the time they'll take to do what they do. It's much less of an opportunistic smash and grab approach, which happens a lot more in IT. But that OT side, this is someone who's determined to cause big problems. And that's a significant differentiator in the threat actor component.
Well, and I know we joked about it earlier about the technology, the T and the I and OT being the same, but we really have brought those commercially off-the-shelf products into this OT environment, right? Yeah. So we've got similar switches and similar firewalls, and the servers are the same. So the technology is the same, but the attack vectors are different, right? And the actors are different, right?
Yeah, but I think that to touch on the threat vector, so far we have seen very few attacks directly on OT. Yep. It always comes through IT.
Yep.
So
an adjacent system.
Exactly. So you being able to watch as it comes through those adjacent systems into the environment. So your attackers have to know both, basically. Yeah. They've got to have the capability to do both.
Unless something was really badly configured and you plugged in your OT network to the cloud.
Or they get really lucky.
Right.
Yeah. So these systems have similarities, but they're different. There's health, life, safety with the OT systems. There's financial repercussions with the IT systems. There's similar technologies used. How do we go about securing these OT networks then, these OT systems? Chris, start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Tom. So, I like to start with looking at a lot of the physical layer access stuff. And one of the things I always like to say is the truth is in the packet. So, when you're looking at securing networks, I always look at, how do you instrument your network in a way that you can effectively get the packets from the network so you can monitor them. So you need that capability, right, to be able to get sensors on the network, get your security solutions on the network. So, we like to approach, looking at these networks and, how do we, most effectively get packets off the network and get these sent to your security devices, your packet capture devices, and there's a lot of challenges in the OT environment for this. We talk about you may have a manufacturing facility, they got 200 sites, and literally each site could have maybe some different switches, routers, manufacturers, and Aaron, we were chatting about this earlier, right? And so for us, we like to look at how can we effectively start getting packet level data, and you mentioned about what's your critical asset. So certain critical assets you may want to look at start doing some wiretapping right at those assets to guarantee that every packet is getting copied over to your security systems, and you start looking at maybe utilizing span in some locations and figuring out where can I get this traffic so I can actually analyze it and start figuring out how to secure the network. But I always like to look at the infrastructure side because, without that packet level data, how do you secure, how do you look back, how do you know what happened? Right. And so that infrastructure side, I think, is forgotten, and you hear a lot of the security vendors, right, talking about visibility, but how do you get that? Right. In a lot of these environments, when you run into 100 base FX or LX or
Conatel 300 bog. Yeah.
Well, and talking about the visibility, so a good starting point. There's great references out there. There's frameworks out there. There's the NIST frameworks. There's a cybersecurity framework, and then certainly the 5 critical ICS controls from SANS. And keys to that is a defensible architecture,
Right.
a visible network, one where you have a risk-based approach to vulnerability management. References like that can really be a great starting point for anybody trying to enable a defensible architecture, and there's great references out there for folks.
Yeah, and again, I go back to I have to know what I have, right? So it's hard for me to defend my architecture if I don't really understand what it is. I don't know where my assets are. I don't know a good understanding of, because Bob, died and he was the one that designed it, and he was the only one that really knew where all the bodies were hidden. And that's unfortunately very true across OT. I've got these diverse environments. I've got multiple sites, hundreds of sites spread across the country. So really understanding what I have, so I know where those risks are, so I know where to put those, where do I need to look, and where do I need to look at my architecture, et cetera. It's really important, whether it's an assessment, whether that's buying a technology that can dive into some of those details, and maybe it's a combination of both of those things.
Yeah, tools are great, plans are great. A spoon doesn't make you healthy.
Exactly.
And a blueprint doesn't build the house.
Right.
So it still takes human beings, it takes effort, it takes a lot of time, it takes standardization. All of these things are part of a comprehensive approach. You're not going to do one thing and be secure.
No.
You're going to have to do all kinds of things different ways at different locations because things are just different there. God forbid you're a multinational company. You've got different kinds of things like geopolitical issues and cultural sensitivities and all kinds of things that factor into this. So to secure the things is a really big question.
Yeah.
Sometimes the things can be secured, sometimes the things can't. We can program PLCs more secure because we have a new method for doing that.
Right.
So it does take all of these things. It takes an ICS village. But it's a bigger picture. So just understand that it's not going to be a light switch problem, no pun intended, but you just do as much of it as you can. Start where you are. It's okay to be on the journey. Just keep picking apart at it, keep talking to people, make friends, learn more about it, but just you can't just hope you're going to set it and forget it and isolate it and, oh, it's air gapped, we're good. It's not going to work.
And what you just said about making friends is probably the most important part, right? So you're saying IT, this whole thing is about IT and OT. Those people need to come together.
Yes.
They need to understand one another.
Go get a
they
beer.
need to understand the business needs versus the engineering and operational needs and considerations. Those people need to get to know one another. They need to learn from one another. They need to drill together. They need to test together. They need to, work together, getting support and understanding from the senior levels of the company all the way down through so that everybody understands each other's role in this and get to know one another and really learn to live together in harmony, especially when you are putting together like an incident response plan. Make decisions together ahead of time so that in the heat of a highly stressful incident, people aren't going, well, who do I call and what do I do?
Right.
You know the person that's in charge of this process or, what internal procedure to activate, who to call. Do you engage the OEM vendor or the system, the designer of the system? Do they need to be involved? Because again, you talked about earlier, maybe you don't own that part of the system. How far can we go in an incident when you're panicked and the lights are out or there is a safety consideration? Those decisions really need to be done ahead of time, made ahead of time, and those folks need to know each other really well and support one another.
Those are all fantastic points, and I got one more question for everybody. I look back, and it's almost been 30 years now since I've been working in ICS or OT, and ripped out old serial networks and installed Ethernet networks and all that back in early to mid 90s. Looking at today, we haven't really come that far. I could probably walk some of the plants and find stuff that we installed or technology from back then. But on the IT side, we get new laptops every 3-5 years maybe. You're constantly upgrading firewalls and infrastructure and different technologies and software on the computer. But on the OT side, I guarantee we can walk a plant and find stuff that's 20 years old.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I gotta say, we've come a long way. I disagree. I firmly disagree. We're at a state now where we can virtualize entire plants. And we can not just virtualize one as a digital twin, we can run 5 million of them. And then we can run 10,000 different scenarios. We can do all of this virtually and find out this is the best situation for my plant. That is a significant transformation. As much as it sounds heretical, there are some places that have operations in the cloud. and this makes some people makes your skin crawl. But I've seen utilities, they're operating on protection alone. They don't even have SCADA. Right. So the fact that they have operations in the cloud and they can get an EMS because they couldn't afford it any other way, that's awesome.
Sure.
So these things, they're dangerous and they're tricky, and it's, it's basically untread ground where it's pioneering. But we've come a long way. We still have those things.
Right.
They still exist. And that span of time, our biggest challenge isn't how do we make it more secure, it's how do we keep everybody trained across this breadth and timeline of technologies, because the problem just gets bigger as you got to maintain all this old stuff because it's not going anywhere, and it doesn't make sense because that generator, you pull it out, rewind it, put it back in service, it's going to run 100 more years.
Right.
So this stuff still will be there. The new stuff still will continue to innovate and challenge our perceptions. We just have to embrace it as professionals. We get to do both.
Right.
Let me expand on that a little bit. So with IT, we see the system refreshes every few years. Yeah. Why don't we have them in OT?
Oh, too challenging to re-engineer a process on a new environment every year. It's just, there's millions of dollars go into engineering like a single process and the machinery that gets chosen for it. And the software that fits with the machines doing the thing that touches the physical space, all that takes millions of dollars and man hours galore. You just can't go in and unplug a thing and plug it back in as a technology component and expect it all to work.
Well, you said it earlier too, it might run 100 years. These plants were built and designed to run for 40, 50 years. Yeah. There wasn't internet back then. There wasn't technology back then. They weren't designed for this. That's why it's behind. We have taken, technology that was meant to be in an isolated environment, and as IT technology has progressed and the need for the business to consume information and data and information about the processes and what the OT technology is doing, one completely predates the other. They were never designed to be, to have routable communication. So those technologies were built way before we had any of this stuff. So that's one of the reasons.
Well, it's also a funny thing. So you said money, right? So there's a financial difference between IT and OT. IT, the budgets in an IT department versus the budgets in an OT department, specifically around OT cyber. IT has entire organizations for networking engineers and firewall engineers and hardware engineers and application development. In an OT environment, you may have a small team that's focused on this. So the funding around these things, and usually on the OT side, the funding is around upgrading the control system or the SCADA system, and it's around the actual business process. The cyber thing has just recently, in the past 10 or so years, been bolted on, right? And it was never included in the budgetary cycles and understanding, because before 10 plus years ago, people didn't consider cyber a major risk in these spaces.
Yeah, it also just adds to the complexity of quick deployment, right? Mm-hmm. That's one of the things continuing running into is you can't do a very quick, fast deployment, because you really have to go back to each of these sites, and it's like a broken record. We say they don't know what they have, but it's true that you now have to systematically go through, and you can't just do a quick IT upgrade to everything. It's a lot of manual work that someone's going to the plants and making sure that they see what's there, and they're smaller teams, so that's also bringing a lot of challenges and figuring out even the basics is what's my switch? Is it a managed switch? Is it an unmanaged switch? Is it who's controlling this? And getting all that documentation, and you get pressure on this has to be implemented, and so there'll be some buy decisions made on certain technologies they're bringing in, but they may not be thinking about best way to implement it, install it, and connect it when you're on-prem. So that brings a lot of challenges of getting it accomplished fast and meeting time frames, and it generally gets extended because they have to continually go on the site and figure out who's going to document this stuff and move to the next phase to start getting some of these security tools installed in these environments.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. That was all great points and responses. Does anybody have anything they want to include before we?
If you want more information, check out the ICS Village. There's a lot of information and people to connect with, peers that you can ask questions to. A lot of us on this have been doing this a long time, and there's a lot more folks back there supporting that would be willing to answer questions that you have.
I was going to say the same thing. We are all open. Find us, find your peers. you got to get connected. Don't try to do this yourself. And just we're all here to help. We're all trying to keep the lights on together.
Yep.
Absolutely. Appreciate you putting this together, Tom.
Well, thank you, everyone.